And Major Garrett joins us from Washington with more here. Again, Major, it's a transition process that you've described as stalled, scrambling, and on pause. What, though, is the level of concern within the Trump inner circle?
Well, here's the great thing about being on the inner circle of any transition. There's no time for panic. You are not allowed that luxury. You just have to deal with the reality of the situation as it is presented to you. And there have been some disruptive realities. Chris Christie was the leader of the transition, a transition that Donald Trump, when he was running for the presidency, did not invest money or time or interest in. Therefore, it was, in its final analysis, less than sufficient for the task ahead. What was the task ahead? Preparing Donald Trump and his team to be the next president of the United States. Christie was forced out, and Mike Pence, the vice president-elect, was put in. And he was put in charge of a staff not large enough to carry out all of the obligations of a transition. Then Mike Pence, looking at how many registered lobbyists were upon that transition team created by Chris Christie, said, you know what? This is a conspicuous problem. Donald Trump said he's come to Washington to drain the swamp, and there are lobbyists in every element of this transition team and in senior positions. So Pence said, I'm going to get rid of them. Even though on 60 Minutes, Donald Trump said, I can't get along without the lobbyists. They're the only ones we can hire. Well, Pence is challenging that proposition throughout all the lobbyists as of last night. So he has to hire lots more people and has to hire them on the fly. And I talked to a senior Trump transition official last night. I said, you better have the best staff secretary in the history of mankind who can read resumes in an instant, make flash decisions about hires, stamp the checks, and get them in harness like tomorrow. And that person didn't disagree with anything that I said in that description of what was required to put people in the seats in the D.C. office, particularly, to get the transition up and ready. But the panic isn't there because there's no time for that. And one other thing. There are all these stories about how far behind they are. Chronologically, compared to previous incoming administrations, they're not behind at all, at least as measured by nominations announced for key cabinet positions. Now, if we're in mid-December and they haven't announced anything, then you can say credibly, accurately, they're behind. But they're not behind any known chronological schedule yet. And they're working through the problem.
Well, speaking to those key cabinet posts, certainly Secretary of State is one of them. We've seen Rudy Giuliani's name now percolate at the top of this list for a few days, Major. But now comes reporting in your piece of the alleged ties to foreign governments. Are these the sorts of things that would normally disqualify someone such as Giuliani?
They may not disqualify Giuliani in the minds of President-elect Trump. They may create confirmation hurdles or maybe confirmation problems sufficient that there has to be a reassessment. Because in a nomination process, there are three considerations. Qualifications, sometimes that drives the nomination decision, sometimes it doesn't, but qualifications always must be weighed. Then, personal comfort. Do you want that person in that position? Do you trust that person in that position should they be confirmed by the United States Senate? And the third is, can be confirmed by the United States Senate? And sometimes confirmation barriers rule somebody out from the get-go, or they get close to being named and there's word from the Senate, hey, that's a no-go, you can't get it done, won't happen. Or if you do want to do this, you're going to have to expend so much political capital, you better be prepared to lose some other confirmation battle because you won't have any political capital left. All these things are being weighed. All I would say about the nomination process, names that float and hang out for a while, but are not rapidly confirmed by an announcement, tend to drift away. I am not predicting that with Giuliani, but I would just say, based on my experience, the longer your name is out there and there's no press release or announcement that you're it, you start to get a little worried.
A tweet storm today, Major, obviously for this president-elect in question, nothing new, writing in, among other things today, that the failing New York Times is so totally wrong on the transition. It is going so smoothly. Combativeness that is not new to Donald Trump, but at this point, in the context of where he now sits, why engage?
Well, first of all, Josh, far be it from me to be the linguistic arbiter of how many tweets constitute a storm. Yeah. I think we need to come up with a number, all right? So I think it's been 3 or 4. That doesn't feel like a storm to me. I think storm needs to be 7 or more, but I'm just going to throw that out there.
That's fair.
It might be a tweet water spout, it might be a tweet, squall. We'll all come up with our various linguistic categories for Twitter, because it's obvious now that we can't divorce ourselves from the fact that these are nothing more than faxed press releases, which on a different journalistic mindset and a different technological era, we would ignore summarily and report around and then tell our audience what they were about. But I digress. Why engage? Well, because Trump feels defensive about this. And the thing that Trump always does is when he feels he's attacked, he counterattacks. There would be a lot more information about these phone calls from various foreign leaders if the campaign would carry out the basic function historically of a presidential transition, which is to read out the phone calls themselves, to say at this time and this day, said leader called. Here is a general summary of the conversation. You might even say how long the conversation lasts. You might include details as to whether somebody was invited to come to Washington or to that particular place. This transition team has no interest in doing that, does it sporadically, only at its whim, and doesn't give, therefore, the press corps who's trying to chronicle the day-by-day development of this presidential transition the information it needs to know to verify who's called and who hasn't called. So Trump takes to Twitter and says lots of foreign leaders have called. Okay, which ones? Why don't you summarize the conversations and tell the public what's actually going on within Trump Tower? Maybe they'll get around to that.
It's hard enough finding out sometimes where he's going to dinner. Major Garrett, there in Washington. As always, we appreciate it.
See you.